So I've been thinking, always a dangerous thing to do. uh, why is that my opening? Uh, my schedule's been getting out of hand again, and I've been trying to tamp it down. And this happens periodically, kind of. And I was trying to figure out how do I reduce things, and like the intuitive thing is always because you're a channel focused around daily releases. That's just like how the formula mostly works. The go-to response is to think, do I reduce the number of time slots again, which has happened before, and so on. But the current intermittent weird schedule kind of gave me new ideas. Not necessarily new ideas, but I'm refocusing on a particular solution that has come up a few times now. Which is just to have like a proper weekend of some sort, like days off. This might sound crazy to people, but my work schedule has consistently featured not having days off. Like whenever I am not at work for a day, that is seen as like a problem to be solved. Like, oh, I'm going to be out of town that day, so I've got to like get enough recordings done on other days to make up for that, like essentially do overtime whenever I'm gonna like not be able to work for a particular day, which is usually even something that's out of my control, so it kind of creates its own stresses. But no, like people should have weekends, and like I do make my own schedule, and I was like, and admittedly the way things work is weird. Like if I schedule specific days as being the days that videos don't necessarily go up, or like the normal videos don't necessarily go up, that's not the same thing as those days being my weekends. It's just me, because you know you record everything in advance. It's all offset by at least one day normally. But anyway, one of my things that came to mind is like one of the reasons I often don't want to reduce the number of videos is because of the fact that like there's almost like this weird guilt in the background of like, oh, there's just an endless mountain of games and I need to get through all that giant mountain of games, and when will I ever make it? And like if I ever reduce my bandwidth, essentially, I'm only slowing down my future progress through said games and so on. What's something that I actually kind of feel better about is the fact that like I'm realizing like I'm looking at this multiplayer time slot or whatever we call it, and I'm like, that those mostly are playthroughs at the moment. Like whatever game I play with Stephanie is pretty much always a playthrough. Whatever game I'm playing with Bird is pretty much always a playthrough. So like that's Y2K and Resident Evil 5. Overwatch is its own weird thing, and stuff like Fall Guys and other weekend multiplayer big group stuff is much more nebulous. But like Resident Evil and Y2K, those are playthroughs, and basically Final Fantasy 14, like that's a playthrough. Like that's just me getting through other games, just in a different format. So really, what happened is, around the edges of my schedule, more playthroughs wormed their way in under their own selection systems, which is that like in my normal schedule, the 11 a.m. video is an RPG, and then noon is a Let's Try, 1 p.m. is the Patreon chosen game, 2 p.m. is this complicated rotating time slot that I have set up now. And when you think about it, it's like, okay, and then my if we speak in terms of streams, well, this one's not streamed, but usually it's Monday night with Stephanie. That's its own separate playthrough, but it's like a Stephanie game, like stuff that seems applicable for that kind of situation and atmosphere. And then Tuesday is usually an Andrew game. Now it's an Andrew and Effie game. And then Thursday I stream a Bird game, and that's the selection system, is like what kind of game would that particular grouping of people play. And like it really is like, it is just another layer. So like on top of constantly making progress on Anachronox and Kentucky Route Zero and Zelda on any given week, I'm also making progress on like Y2K and Final Fantasy 14 and Resident Evil 5. And those are like equally valid playthroughs by and large. And in fact, in recent weeks, in many cases, those multiplayer series are actually getting more views than many of the supposed like mainline official series that take up the main days and everything. And it's like, I kind of have treated this as like free space. It's like, oh, here's my main schedule, I even think of it as like I have to do 5 video credits, which is a half an hour recording every day. There's 2 for the RPG because it's an hour-long time slot, 1 for the Let's Try, 1 for the Zelda, the Patreon game, and 1 for the rotating slot. It's like, okay, that's 5. And so like that's how I ration out my daily work, is I got to do get those 5 video credits done on average. And if I think like, oh, I only got 4 done yesterday, I should try to do 6 today, and so on. Like there's always like the rationing involved. But that's 35. If you multiply that out, like 5 times 7, that's 35 half an hour things per week, which is doable in a vacuum. But I keep letting more and more stuff go towards these multiplayer things, and I'm happy with those, and people seem happy with those. The videos do well, and I get to keep in touch with a variety of different people and so on, and keep those kinds of things going. And they add variety because each of those people adds a different flavor. Like a Bird video is very different from a Stephanie video, and so on in different ways. And like that's all. I think that's all good for the channel, good for the audience, and all good content. And so I don't want the solution for getting my schedule under control to be cutting out any of these things, because I think they're all good to include. And so the situation for me is like, then let's do this weird thing. I just spent 6 minutes explaining what's on the screen, and people would have understand if they just looked at it already, probably by now. But I'm gonna give myself a weekend, basically, which is that I'm going to just straight up, like if you take it at face value, like let's just be honest, like because that's what giving yourself a weekend is. I'm just gonna work less. I'm just going to make fewer videos, is basically what it functions as. But if you look at this nice, symmetrical, clean schedule, there won't be days off. Like there's going to be plenty content. There's going to be the normal schedule of the normal videos 5 days a week, like a normal work week sort of thing, but it's offset and split for pacing reasons, I guess. And then I'm going to have the multiplayer videos essentially pick up the slack. So instead of stacking 1 or 2 long videos at the end of each day in order to just kind of figure out where to put them, basically, because that's basically how it's been working, I'm instead going to just put them up on Sunday and Wednesday, where I'll just not do the other videos. This seemed clean. This seemed nice. In the past, when I did reduce schedule, like when Judgment was coming to an end, the video game Judgment, the Yakuza spinoff, I was talking about staggering my schedule to make it work better. And I did a thing where every game took a day off, and they all took a different day off. And mostly that was just really confusing and hard to understand compared to this, which I think is relatively clean. I think this is relatively straightforward. So it's like, okay, the normal videos go up Monday, Tuesday, Thursday, Friday, Saturday, and then the multiplayer stuff goes up on Wednesday and Sunday. This is picked somewhat arbitrarily, but also partly logically, in that like Sunday, like okay, so that's the actual weekend. And also like the biggest spike for activity is like around Friday and Saturday each week. So like Sunday kind of made sense, I suppose. And then I just kind of mathed it out a little bit of like, okay, where can I put the other day off so that it's roughly as far away from Sunday as I can get. That way there's like a pacing to it where you never have like 2 back to, like I don't want to make since the multiplayer videos are long-ish and whatnot, I don't want them all to come out in 2 consecutive days every week. Because like there's a cleanness to being like, okay, here's part 7 and part 8 of Y2K on 2 consecutive days. But then like for big stuff like Overwatch and Final Fantasy 14 and so on, they're big old videos, and it would be helpful to like pace them out a little bit and not have them be on consecutive days. So having the big bomb of multiplayer videos happen like Sunday and Wednesday, like this made sense to me. This looked nice. This looked clean. This seemed to make sense to me. And so I think I'm happy with what I've landed on for this schedule. I think it overall makes sense. I think I've done enough of 2020 with basically no breaks on the schedule. I think this is a good medium, because yeah, these particular other playthroughs have kind of wormed their way into the schedule, and they've kind of bloated things out, and I've felt a little overwhelmed. And so cutting down my quote unquote like video budget or whatever the fuck from 35 credits to 25 credits per week which is how that math works out, going from 7 days to 5 days a week. Like, this is good. That's good stuff. That's 5 fewer hours of recordings that I have to keep up with per week. But there's still like hours of content every day, like enough content that I think people will still be like overwhelmed by how much there is if they're trying to follow more than a couple shows anyway. I don't think there's really a lack of stuff to watch. So I think this is a forgivable reduction in schedule for a number of reasons. But yeah, this is what I've landed on. I think I'm gonna enact it next week, like starting let's say starting Monday. I think Sunday might still be normal videos or something. I don't know. I might just, maybe I'll start it on Sunday next week. Yeah, I'll probably just start on Sunday. My main concern right now is that my first quote-unquote weekend of multiplayer videos might be really sparse, because the fire kind of fucked this week up in a special high point of badness. And the result of that was that I kind of blew all of my multiplayer videos, kind of blew all of them trying to keep the schedule busy this week. So I don't really have necessarily videos to upload on Sunday, but we'll see if by the time I reach Sunday, Friday and Saturday will have gone by, and I'll have something at least. It might be a little sparse as we just get the whole thing rolling again, but once we get this figured out, it'll look roughly like this screen here, obviously with games switching out for other games as they get done and whatnot. Like Resident Evil 5, we already beat the story, so we just have to play the DLC, and then that'll become a new game and so on, and blah, 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 blah. But that's the gist of it. Giving myself weekends. Sunday and Wednesday will be my days off or whatever, which is where, and in order to cover them up, I'll unload the multiplayer videos on those days instead of putting them in this 3 o'clock and sometimes 4 o'clock time slot at the end of the day, which might be a glut of content on Sunday and Wednesday. That might be a lot, but it definitely won't feel like that the channel's taking days off or anything. So it'll serve that purpose at least, I guess. In other news, I'm putting an end to the Patreon Q&A. Last episode, I just kind of had like the moment of like, this whole thing's just kind of like, I don't know, played out at this point, isn't it? So I realized we're coming up on 100 episodes, and I'm like, nobody's this interesting. Nobody needs this many. No one needs this many questions coming their way. Like, anything that people were really burning to ask, it's probably been asked at this point. And I don't think it's also a particularly strong incentive to join the Patreon, so I don't think it really was serving its purpose as being like a consistent source of content that incentivizes people to join the Patreon. It's good for the people that are on it, but I don't think it necessarily was bringing in a lot of converts necessarily. In part because whenever I make the periodic like free video that's public to everybody to sort of like advertise it a little bit, that almost never actually led to any spike of subscribers or anything. So it's just a thing that was nice while it lasted, and I think it's good to let it expire as it's kind of played out its usefulness and its and any real topics that we could have discussed have largely been spent by now, I think. So I'm going to call an end to that, and I'm going to try to reallocate that time. So now I'm going to be I put out feelers already in our little multiplayer Discord, and I'm going to try to replace that by having a actual public podcast once again. So instead of me single-handedly answering questions and whatnot, I'm going to go ahead and do a podcast with friends and whatnot. Right now, it looks like the people signing on to join in it looks like Andrew and Colonel RPG are both game for it, and we'll see if anyone else decides to show up either on a regular basis or on random weeks as like guests in a rotating sort of way. But that's the kind of plan. I am currently in the naming process. I'm trying to figure out what to name the podcast, and that's always hard to do, in part because I keep making podcasts that don't necessarily have a topic, like a theme that unifies the entire podcast. Like, it's 3 Let's Player gamer people, but that's incredibly vague and also not necessarily definite. That's also not necessarily what we're talking about. So, like, I don't know. So if you want a thing to comment on in the comment section, you can suggest names for podcasts, and I don't know, maybe we'll end up using yours if it strikes us the right way. I don't necessarily have I don't have much of a prerequisite yet for what to call the podcast. I'm kind of drawing a blank right now, to be honest. I will say, just learning from my own mistakes, you don't want to name a podcast like after the number of people who are on the podcast, because you're just inviting yourself to immediately be contradicted by having just a new person show up and add to the roster, or somebody just stops showing up and then immediately the number is wrong. That's never worked in the past, really. So you don't want to be like, the number of people, blah, blah, blah. Fucking, like, Bird suggested the 3 topless banditos, and I'm like, no, you do not number the podcast. You do not say how many people are in it. You can say it, you can call it something plural, but you can't count the people in the title. It's just a bad idea. It's also like, you don't want to name it like, it's like the angry one and the blah 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 and the blah blah blah, like after the 3 people individually, because you don't, like, I don't know for sure if this will be the permanent roster or if things will groove out differently and so on. It's a bit like Overwatch. You just kind of start playing it and see who shows up, and by the end of that, like, I probably wouldn't have predicted that the most common roster of Overwatch would be me, Andrew, and Effie. In part because Effie wasn't even in like the first 20 episodes. So that stuff. Anyway, I'm just rambling. That's what I do, though. It's an evening. I had a nice dinner. The air's decent today, and I just recorded the Patreon Q&A. That the penultimate episode 99. I'm right about the number, right? So my next recording of that series will be the finale, and that just seemed like a good capstone to sort of end it there. I don't necessarily have an immediate idea of what to replace it with on Patreon, but it just seemed about time to stop doing weekly Q&As. 100 episodes, many of which are 2 hours long, is just, it's enough. I'll leave them up there, so it will still continue to be a Patreon perk in that anybody who joins Patreon can just go back and watch 100 episodes of stuff, which I presume most people have not done, even within the Patreon. So it's still, the library will still be there. You just click on the tag that shows up somewhere on the profile page that says Q&A, and that filters the posts on Patreon down to just those posts and nothing else. And that does that. Yeah, I think that's all there really was to say today. So that's the new schedule. Just like this week, next week might be chaotic in that we're converting from one thing to another, and also there might just be gaps where certain videos just aren't ready, or there hasn't been a new recording of said multiplayer game before the new schedule was announced. I mean, since the new schedule was announced, so it's just not ready yet because we haven't had our next session yet, for example. I haven't completely made up my mind about how to deal with Wasteland, in that I'm not 100% sure on whether it's going to count as, if I'm going to move it to the RPG, move it to the weekend slot thing, or if I'm going to keep it in the RPG thing. It seems likely I'll keep it in the RPG thing where it switches off with Anachronox whenever it's available, just because the availability of Wasteland is highly variable, because the editing is a project. Like, I know people keep asking for more episodes and they want it faster, and I get messages on places whenever it misses a day or whatever when they think it's going to come out and so on, but like, it is a work-intensive playthrough, and I am my own editor, and it's just it's a process. You do the big multi-hour recording, and then I have to try to parallel edit between the 2 perspectives in a way that makes sense and so on, and it takes hours every time in a way that most playthroughs don't. So it'll just kind of come and go when it is available or isn't available, and that's just kind of the nature of the beast, I suppose. But anyway, guys, thanks for watching like always, and I'll see you next time. Yeah. Bye.